Welcome to The Golden Shadow, the podcast about psychology, philosophy, myth, mysticism, and mystery. My name is Alyssa Polizzi.
And I'm Arran Rogerson.
And today we're discussing the psychological attitudes of extroversion and introversion through the model of Jungian typology. Now, although these terms have been absorbed into the general lexicon, their meaning is frequently misunderstood and often mischaracterized. We claim, oh, he likes to spend a lot of time alone. He's an introvert. And then feel surprised at the same individual who gets up on stage and performs a show and talks to the crowd of fans afterwards. How can we better understand our relationship to these psychological modes of being and refine our definitions of them?
Yeah, I think that extroversion and introversion are terms that we're very familiar with nowadays, even though they have a deep history and there's a deep background. They're very technical terms, and they're describing something that is incredibly complex, which is our minds, our personalities, our behavior. And as always, we tend to think about things as simplistically as possible. And think about things in black and white.
Very black and white.
We're also prone to wanting to adopt certain characteristics, as identities, by which I mean we really like the idea of saying, I'm an introvert.
Right.
Or he's an extrovert. And we find that to be kind of nice. It's like it's nice to have like a label we can slap on people. But the truth about these terms is that they're complex, and everyone's a little bit introverted and extroverted, and it fluctuates based on the situation and based on your mood. You might grow to become an extrovert in certain ways, or you might grow to become an introvert. And you might find yourself in certain social scenes where you're very introverted and other social scenes where you're not. So what we're trying to do here is to get a little more in depth and figure out what it is we actually mean.
Yeah, today we're exploring the gray of this concept because, right, as you said, I think we really tend to gravitate towards wanting to label ourselves because it feels good to know who we are or who another person is.
Right, it's fun.
Yeah, it's fun. And it also brings some sort of comfort and grounding to a situation. But I think there's probably a lot of individuals who, despite labeling themselves as an extrovert or an introvert, actually feel that they move fluidly through those terms, depending, as you said, on the situation, maybe your state of mind, what's going on, how your day was. And all of those things factor into the true psychological orientation. And when these terms were created, which has its history with Carl Jung, as I mentioned earlier in the introduction, he really wanted to understand why it seemed that he would observe individuals in his life who had certain attitudes that kind of seemed to indicate that their energy, their ideas, their theories flowed externally out towards the world, while others flowed internally. And the specific history behind this is that it really came from his partnerships with Freud and Adler. Because according to Jung, you know, his theory for this initially was really built by trying to understand why Freud's view of neurosis was so different from that of Adler. And Freud really saw his patients as being basically predominantly dependent upon defining themselves through their parents, of course, or the outside world. And Adler was much more focused on how a person or a subject seeks their own security, supremacy, agency internally. And both of those saw those as the cause of neurotic splits for individuals. And so one was very focused inward, the other focused outward. And he wanted to understand what was going on.
Right. Jung wanted to create a better paradigm through which we might understand ourselves and other people, understand our relationships.
Yes.
So if we're trying to get a grasp of this axis, this sort of realm that introversion and extroversion is referring to, I think a way that's helpful for me to think about it is the way in which our energy flows.
Yes.
Or the way that we interact with energy. It's how little or how much we try to isolate our internal energy from our external energy. So there's sort of this notion of borders between inside and outside. And someone who is extroverted, we can think of as having very open borders. And they let their internal energy mingle with external energy very fluidly. They let the outside come in and the inside come out. And so the gates are kind of open. Whereas someone who's introverted is much more likely to want to keep barriers between them and the outside. So their energy doesn't mingle as much. And whatever is happening, whatever sort of flow is going on outside of them, they're trying to protect themselves from that flow. And that sounds simple, but it's not. It's really complicated the way it expresses itself. And you can see that there's certain ways in which people are clearly protecting their energy, and then the next moment they're not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or maybe they're moving outwardly in this way that looks like they're being very externally oriented,
Right.
but they're still protecting themselves very,
Yes,
very strongly.
yes.
And so this idea of energy flow is really kind of what we're trying to tap into, and it's this very subtle thing
Yes.
that we need to make more sense of.
Yes, I think that this is a really helpful way of considering these terms, that we're not necessarily looking at someone's exact actions, but the motivation or what moves them. So as you're saying, we're following the flow of energy. We're following the flow of psychological energy here, and that's what really helps you tap into: do I feel like an extrovert in this situation? Do I feel introverted in that situation?
Right.
You start to find the subtlety and the nuance in the gray area, and that's more of what we want. Excuse me.
So maybe if we can try to think of some real world examples of what someone who is extroverted does in a given situation. So let's take the example, very basic, of a party. Social scene, it's a group of people coming together.
Yeah.
Extroversion, introversion is usually kind of tapping into the social aspect of us.
Yeah.
So someone who is extroverted and goes to a party, let's say, is the kind of person who, no matter what's happening at the party, no matter what the energy is, no matter what activities are going on, no matter who's there, they're going to kind of go with the flow in some way. They're going to let themselves be pushed and pulled in certain directions, and they're going to participate in whatever's happening. And they might even be arriving at the party without much expectation. They're just like, they're open.
Yeah, they're open.
Let the party take me. Like, let the party consume my energy.
Right.
I will donate my energy, and I will absorb the energy of the party, and I'll find myself doing things that maybe I thought I wasn't going to do.
Yeah.
And whatever is happening, it feels good to me. I like it. It's fine. I wasn't expecting to, dance at this party,
Right.
but everyone was dancing. So I started dancing, and it's great. And I feel good, and I feel like energy is coming to me from just the energy of everyone else.
Right.
And,
For the extrovert, the external, the object, so that which is outside of them, the subject, is interesting, attractive, desirable. They want to interact with it.
Yeah.
They want to be in it and be a part of it. They want to take energy from it, and they want to give energy to it.
Right.
So thinking again about those open borders, there's just a desire to kind of get into the mix of it and see what happens.
more of an exchange.
Yeah.
There's more trading
Yeah,
of
there's
energy.
more trading.
Whereas the introvert, how would an introvert approach this kind of scene, do you think?
Well, first and foremost, when we think about the introvert as having more of those closed borders, and that should be like protected borders is like a better word than just closed.
Right.
Because the introvert is, we don't want to just say, oh, yes, introverts don't like going out. They don't like parties. They like people.
Right. Again, that's the misconception,
Yeah,
right?
right.
We're trying to defy these misconceptions about what it means.
Yeah, because what the introvert is often seeking is depth and quality and an exchange that feels authentic and good, because the wide open borders is a little bit too much. It's a little bit too draining. They don't want to say hi to every single person. They don't want to mingle through the crowd and say hello to this stranger and hello to that other old friend. They want to find their close friends at the party.
Right.
And that's when they start to maybe even seem like they come alive and they're open and they're talking a lot, because there is a kind of like a cyclical energy like expenditure that's happening.
Yeah.
They're giving their energy to someone they know, and their friends kind of giving it back, but they're very contained. And so the introverts tend to be more contained, and they're really more focused on that personal inner dynamic. And other people might be a part of that.
Sure.
But if for the introvert, meeting a bunch of new people is just like, oh, I have to have small talk. Like, it's just such a pain. Like, that's draining.
Right. So a counterintuitive example maybe of this is the introvert shows up at the same party, let's say, but no one is dancing, and the introvert came to dance.
Yeah.
So the introvert arrives, and instead of going with the flow and saying like, well, I guess this is kind of like a talking party, like I'll talk because that's what's going on. The introvert's like, I came to dance, and my internal energy feels That's what I want.
This is
That's good.
this is such a good point, because in another big misconception, introverts are all really shy people and they're just going to sit in the corner and not do anything. That's not necessarily true. There are introverts who have expression and energy to show, but they want to do it their way. So they might, oh, their favorite song comes on and no one else is dancing. The introvert's going to want to flow with their own energy.
Like, I came to dance and this is what I want to do. And even though the internal energy is clashing with the external energy, that doesn't bother me. I feel okay with this. And I'm going to get energy from doing what I came to do, doing what feels good to me. And that's okay. And so the one person at the party who is dancing, while everyone else is talking, people might normally say, "Well, that person's really extroverted. Look at them, like they really like the party." And it's like, no, it's the opposite. Don't you see? Like, they're doing something internally that's different than the outside, and therefore they are, in some sense, isolating their own energy from outside energy. And that doesn't make them, we shouldn't think of this as being someone who's closed off and disconnected in a bad way, or someone who is crazy, or someone who is uncooperative,
or just the weirdo at the party.
Or the weirdo. Those things can certainly be true, but we're not really talking about the way that this interacts with other forms of personality, like disagreeableness or agreeableness. We're kind of just trying to tap into this idea of energy exchange. And what motivates them? Where does their own energy and desires want to flow, and that's what we're following. We did talk a little bit about this topic in our episode 9 on the Big Five. They do use the extroverted as a major category. And we talked about it a little bit during, what was that, episode 3, Thinking and Feeling, which is also part of the Jungian typology model. Check that out if you haven't listened to it. But we're really going to get more nuanced and really look at this more from that Jungian perspective versus the Big Five. So let's start a little bit more with the extroverted philosophy. We've talked a little bit about it, but as I mentioned, the movement of energy for the extrovert, the focus is on the object, aka not purely yourself and the outside world. I see.
So we tend to really pick up certain characteristics with extroverts, and this is of course general, but
we're generalizing because we have to.
So extroverts, they tend to be altruistic, outgoing, accommodating, concerned with the collective. Interest in that external object, desire to influence and be influenced, a need to join in, as we talked about. Another point that I like to talk about with extroverts is an endurance or resilience. Because we're talking about those open borders. It's like you kind of have to have this strong outer layer to mingle with so much in the world, and not just people, environments, situations. The extrovert tends to be a bit more adventurous in that way.
And they gain energy from that. They open their borders, and it seems almost as if they can absorb energy from the outside, and it lifts them up. So that's why they tend to be the life of the party. Someone who has more friends, or kind of they cultivate the process of meeting lots of acquaintances and having lots of friends, because their attention and their interest, to some degree, in certain situations, is on the surrounding world. They also tend to be enthusiastic. That's one thing coming from the Big Five traits, is that they seem to be someone who experiences a lot of positive energy. And when they socialize, they seem to be like very joyous. Someone who feels enthusiastic, someone who seems really motivated to do social things, and sincerely seems to be really happy when they're socializing. And this is also in relation to assertiveness. So extroverted people may tend to lead the way socially, put themselves out there, feel as if it's a good thing for them to throw out an idea or organize a party, or just try to get people energized and motivated. And they're kind of willing to take that risk, you might say, of putting themselves out there, because they gain energy from it.
And they see the value. They see what that type of environment creates for other people. And certainly also that, like, within these gatherings, you have pockets of little mini environments where like people can, move into a more introverted place or have the dance floor where everyone can mingle. So the extrovert, I think, cares a lot about people, environments, kind of creating a space. And that's why they're quite an asset to have in social situations or in groups. They have a powerful dynamic to them. But there's also a way to be too extroverted.
Right.
Maybe.
So the pitfalls,
The pitfalls
of extroversion, the way that extroversion could be viewed as a becoming a vice
Yes.
or a shadow
Yeah.
quality.
Yeah.
And this might be someone, from my perspective, who their borders are so open that they don't protect their own internal energy very well.
Yes.
And they sort of are like like a leaf in the wind. They're just like they just get blown around, and
Yeah.
like they're too easily influenced by what's going on outside of them. They don't necessarily maintain that necessary internal structure to kind of ground themselves and figure out how they really feel, what they really believe, maybe
Yeah.
where they are right now and what they want to do.
Yes.
And they might just kind of find themselves going in whatever direction the crowd is going.
Yes, especially when paired with a type of very compassionate type personality. This
yeah.
is a kind of individual who may end up sacrificing themselves too much because their focus is on the objective demands of another,
Right.
or a group or the environment. And it's like, well, if anything's going to be sacrificed here, it should be me, right?
Yeah.
So they lose energy and they become drained.
Right.
And then they might need to withdraw or kind of realize that they've got some bad habits here. They tend to take care of everyone else before themselves.
Right. So you could be extroverted or introverted, but we're kind of talking about when it becomes a vice, when this energy flow is not something that you're regulating very effectively, very well. And so that's true for extroversion. You're not regulating your energy well, perhaps, if you're an extrovert, and you're letting your energy get dissipated too easily or be influenced too easily, or you're not protecting your energy. You give yourself away too much, and it's poor control over your energy flow.
Yes. I don't think this is totally always true of extroverts, but there can sometimes be a tendency, especially when the extroverted attitude is very focused on, ooh, this object, ooh, that object, which is like, ooh, this person, that's exciting. Ooh, I like that. That there's a sense of a shallowness and it's lacking depth.
Right.
And, this is for everyone to figure out on their own if they fall into this category.
Sure.
But it does happen because part of, especially if somebody gets energy because they've got this extroverted dynamic by connecting to other people, and yet there might be something kind of deep inside their background that allows them to actually open deep, vulnerable places in themselves, that their interactions seem really cool and fun, but they don't go very deep.
Right.
And especially the type of extroverted attitude, when one tends to interact with it, can feel exciting on the other end. You might feel very drawn into an extrovert, like, oh my God, like, wow, like I'm getting a lot from this. And then you might, depending on who you are, want to give that energy. And that can certainly lead to a situation where you've got like these energy drain individuals who are just like sucking.
Certainly. Yeah. Balance in all things, right?
Balance in all things, yes. So let's talk a little bit about the introverted individual. So that movement of energy, that focus is towards the subjective or the inner world.
Right.
So we tend to see with the introverts more of a reflective nature. They're thoughtful, they're hesitant, and sometimes resistant to outer influences, those protected borders. They may keep to oneself. They're curious but hesitant. They're really activated truly by what activates them. So really the energy starts inside and then flows out into the world. And so introverts can be incredibly compelling people who seem like there's so much going on and there's so much that they're doing, but you're kind of sometimes viewing it from afar.
Yeah.
And then they open it up to you and you see it and you're like, oh my God, like what's going on here? This is like this vast, rich inner world or creativity or what have you, but it's coming from deep within them, and then they're letting it kind of go out into the world.
Right. So definitely if people who you meet who seem to have a rich, deep mystery within them,
Yeah.
either you've never met someone like this before, or they seem to stand out in the group as sort of just doing their own thing, and maybe they're even really social. Maybe they do
Yeah.
lots of things with other people, but they still seem to have their own inner world
Yeah.
that isn't necessarily off limits.
Yeah,
They
certainly,
might
certainly.
let you in
Yeah.
and experience it, but you can kind of still sense that, like, this guy Joe is just sort of like an enigma, and he has this deep world, and he does his own thing, and he clearly has built up an internal architecture that is very unique to him.
Yeah.
And he's had to protect his energy most of his life to do that.
Yeah.
And that, again, can be something that is very positive, or it can easily become negative.
Yeah.
And, perhaps the pitfalls of being introverted might be a little more obvious.
Yeah.
Let's say
Yeah.
someone who is cut off,
Yes. Yeah. Disconnected.
they cannot be penetrated. They might even seem uncooperative or unwilling
Sure.
to sort of participate. You might not be able to get them to do things that everyone else seems to be wanting to do.
Right.
And there's also this possibility of the sort of internal autodidactic vortex where someone is so wrapped up in themselves that they might lose touch with reality.
Yeah. It's interesting with the introvert because they're aware of what's going on externally. They're aware of what's going on in the room or within a situation, but they're just not motivated by it. It doesn't excite them. And so what can happen when that kind of dynamic is going on is that, they can lose touch with reality, lose touch with what's going on with the group. They can allow themselves to kind of just dip into the place that feels comfortable. And so they don't want to kind of challenge their own place of safety or
Right.
comfort. And that can really give off that very closed vibe that can sometimes come with the introverts.
Right.
And that defensiveness, that wanting to protect and keep themselves in that shell, can end up really holding them back from some sort of enriching experience that they could have.
Definitely.
I think one side of the introvert that we don't often think about, but it is important to consider because we're talking about people whose motivation comes from an internal place and that protection and cultivation of inner energy, which means you have a really quite intense or just deep inner dialogue and sort of viewpoint that's coming from your own place of your own theories, your own insights, your own feelings, whatever it might be. And sometimes when you really identify with that to a point of over-identification, the introvert's ego can really become inflated.
Right.
And the importance of your subjective attitude or perspective trumps everything else.
Right, and the ego tends to do this already on its own, where it tends to kind of consume reality and become convinced that it is everything, or
Yeah.
that it's the entire universe.
Yeah.
And part of the advantage of having people around you and letting their energy flow into you
Yeah.
openly is that they kind of keep you even keeled, and they keep you on track of, hopefully, at least these are healthy relationships, they kind of keep you more grounded.
Yeah.
They let you know when you are sort of becoming overly inflated with your
Yeah.
own ideas. They push back when something that you're doing or saying maybe isn't appropriate or isn't actually going to work to get you what you want. So this introversion, if it gets extreme, if it can easily become a vice
Yeah.
of just locking away the energy. And as we've alluded to before in previous episodes many times, there's always this healthy sort of chaos order thing that you want to cultivate if you want to grow,
Yeah.
which is you open yourself up to change without opening yourself up so much that you get torn to pieces
Right.
or you collapse or
Yeah.
something like that. And the sort of process of individuation is one of opening up, disintegrating a little bit, and that's the chaos. And then you kind of reintegrate, and that's sort of the order is you kind of rebuild, and then you open yourself up and you kind of disintegrate, and then you reintegrate, and that sort of energy exchange is what leads to ultimately becoming the person you're meant to be.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, absolutely.
extroversion, introversion definitely ties into that of
Yes.
energy exchange of how much do you allow yourself to be exposed
Yeah.
in order to grow. Okay, so we listened back at the podcast so far, and we heard that the construction going on in the background is quite audible, more audible than we were expecting. But we are recording this in our home studio, which is a bedroom, and we're having to work with what we got. And there is construction going on, probably
Yeah.
not 30 feet from where we are, and hopefully it's not too distracting. But that's the way it goes. So now it's time for shadow work.
Shadow work.
And we're going to explore what kind of shadow work you might do in relation to introversion and extroversion.
Yeah, because typology is such a good framework to utilize when considering what can someone do to do shadow work or just to develop one's whole personality. And it's the recognition that we have to develop both of these orientations instead of just relying on the one that we connect to the most, recognizing that in different environments, in different situations, that we might be more extroverted or we might be more introverted. And how can you challenge that status quo, that homeostasis for yourself and do the uncomfortable thing? Because that's shadow work. It's uncomfortable work.
Right. To hit this home again, as we've done many, many times, the shadow is something that if we do not integrate it, it will express itself in unhealthy ways or at inappropriate times.
Yes.
So shadow work is always about wholeness,
Yes.
completeness.
Yeah.
How do you become more complete? And so how do you develop the less expressed side of you?
Yeah.
If you are an introvert, let's say, if you lean towards introversion, how might you develop your extroverted side more so, and vice versa?
Yeah.
And one way to explore this is to use examples and use guinea pigs. And so Alyssa and I are going to talk about ourselves in terms of introversion and extroversion.
Yeah.
Would you like to go first?
Sure. I think that I've always considered myself to be someone who flows from extroversion and introversion quite fluidly, to the point at which I think sometimes people don't realize my introverted nature. And sometimes for some people who do know me, they're surprised by how extroverted I'm being.
Sure.
So I have a lot of these facets that I feel very in touch with, yet at the same time, in a certain dynamic, I will really fall into that shadow part of it and feel deeply, deeply uncomfortable. So I guess like the first place my mind goes with, I am quite extroverted. I think if you don't know me and you meet me, you'll think I'm quite an extroverted person.
Definitely.
I get a lot of energy from other people, very connected, like kind of getting in the thick of it, depending on the situation, and kind of authentically connecting. But in certain areas of life, I kind of shy away. And so I've never really considered myself to be much of an artist or a creative type, but I've always been like in a group of those types of people. And when I started working on music and wanting to be a musician, that there came this desire to want to perform. And it was something I really struggled with personally.
Yeah.
And despite being kind of someone who in the friend group, if we're having a party, I'm probably the one who's like walking around, making sure people are having fun, making food for people. It's like there's Alyssa, she tends to be like a big energy in the party, but to like get up on stage and show myself in that way felt incredibly intimidating. Something that held a lot of discomfort because for me, a lot of my shadow material was my creative side. I'm like, I'm not creative like my friends are, but music was something that I felt really called to. And a big key of understanding the process of shadow work with typology is that assimilation means living in that uncomfortable function. It means embodying it. It means cultivating it. And so I really, I don't know how many years ago it was at this point, 8 or 9 years ago or something like that, made a decision to get up on stage and sing my own songs. And I've had some bad times doing that. You're just like shaking with embarrassment. But it's something that has challenged me a lot to step into that shadow material and to really look that introverted nature, because to me, it's like singing was always very personal. It's something I did alone or just kind of walking around the house. I would hum melodies and maybe I'd kind of write a song or so, but I didn't want to share it. And that's that very introverted thing. That rich inner world was within me, but there was something sort of pushing me to want to open up to the world. And then when I did, it was like, oh, I got really great feedback. My friends loved it. People
Yep.
in the crowd were really nice. And then it was like, oh, I kind of mingle with people, and it helped build that extroverted nature in this very specific environment.
Right. So I kind of think of you as being, you're both introverted and extrovert, as you said. I feel like you're kind of on the border. If you had to sort of say, like, are you an extrovert or an introvert? Like, choose one. It's like it's really on the border. But one way I like to think about this is you're a very extroverted feeler, but you seem sort of like an introverted thinker.
Yes.
In many ways.
Yes.
And these express themselves there's a lot of complexity here.
Yeah.
And it's hard to sort of understand the complexity without really spending a lot of time with you. But you are very people oriented. You are very externally oriented.
Yeah.
You let your energy flow out freely. You donate energy. You yield time to people. You're very, very concerned with what's going on with the group. You want to make sure everyone's okay, everyone's taken care of. And so you're very extroverted in that way.
Yeah.
People give you energy. You don't really like being alone. You like events, you like having people over, you like doing things that are social.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a big part of you that is very protective of your energy.
Yeah.
You do tend to withdraw sometimes. You will retreat away from things that don't feel right to you.
Right.
And you really, really want authenticity in your relationships.
Yeah.
And that means that you are willing to let your energy mingle, but only if certain requirements, you might say, are met, which is like this needs to feel like a real relationship. This person needs to feel like an honest, good, real person. I really want to exchange energy, but I'm a little hesitant to do that with everyone.
Yeah.
And so the extroverted side of you is kind of turning on and turning off at certain points. And that, again, everyone's like this in some way. There's a lot of complexity to each individual.
Yeah. That part of what you're tapping into is like there's that drive by the extroverted side, but by its nature, sort of feeling and thinking tend to be like slightly opposed to each other. So extroverted feeling gives me a shadow sort of inferior function of introverted thinking. And I think for me that when my feeling function, some sort of harmony of emotion or relationship is threatened, I step into the shadow quality of introverted thinking and it's not balanced. And so I'll be like, oh, I have this desire to play in a band with my friends and we'll connect and we'll be great and we'll have fun. But, oh, I'm nervous and I'm scared. And then my coherency of thought and logic just goes out the damn window. It's like, oh, but like, I'm not good enough. And all my friends are better than me. And I'm nervous. It's like, I can't think like my internal dialogue is fucked.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
so is that the first swear word we've had on the podcast so far?
No,
you don't think
maybe.
So? Maybe. Sorry, kids. Anyways, yeah. So I think a lot of the work that you do on yourself is finding ways to better regulate your energy.
Yeah.
I feel like you do give yourself away sometimes too much, and you drain yourself, and you get exhausted.
Yeah.
And when there's tension in social scenes, it really affects you in a deep way, where you actually feel like you need to take on that burden. And often the burden's not yours to take on. And you need to protect your energy better.
Yeah.
And you've definitely grown a lot in the last 5 years, I would say, in sort of this introversion thinking of like developing your own personal structure, your own personal paradigm of how to lift yourself up and to navigate the world to protect your energy in this way. And that's actually been really good for you at developing this better regulation of your introversion, extroversion energy.
Thanks.
Do you agree?
I like to hope so. I think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to me. So Alyssa and I are kind of complementary in many ways. We're also kind of opposite in other ways.
Yeah.
And so I tend to think of myself as being, to use the same kind of terminology, I think it's interesting to think about myself as being sort of a extroverted thinker and an introverted feeler.
Yeah.
Meaning that the sort of deeper, more instinctual side of me, the more unconscious side of me is naturally kind of self-contained.
Yeah.
That's definitely my kind of go-to way of being is I feel like I can only rest if I'm by myself, usually.
Yeah.
Social situations drain me. I have always had a very rich internal life, contemplative life, you might say. I was a very serious cross-country runner for a very long time, and that was a very solitary thing that I did for very seriously for about 8 years of just being alone, being in my own head, and kind of developing that world. And I've focused a huge amount of time also just as a creative person, developing my own inner world.
Yeah.
And sometimes at the expense of my outer world in many ways. But there's a lot of thinking that I do that's very externally motivated. Like I want to affect things around me. I feel very moral, and I feel very much like there's problems around me that I want to solve. I want to engineer the world. I think about problems in people around me, and I want to do something about it. I care about the group very much, and I want the group to succeed. But it's very engineered. I'm thinking, how can the group succeed? How can the group improve? How can we develop something as a group that'll be good for all of us? And so there's that thinking function that is very extroverted in a strange way.
Yes, you're also like really deeply interested in just like how the world works, how the universe works. Let's this concept, let's break it down. Like this is very extroverted thinking. It's not like purely just internal theory that you're just, it's like, oh, look at this thing that's happening outside of me, and everyone interacts with it. And that seems to create a flow and an energy. So you're very very wrapped up in that.
Right. And so this becomes a vice in many ways. If you ask people about me as someone, how is Arran's energy at a party? It's like Arran does his own thing, usually. Or if he's not going to do his own thing, he almost has to be convinced of why doing something else would be his own thing. That you just need to convince him that that's true.
Sure.
So I usually have a plan. I usually have something that I am thinking should happen, and I want to stick to that. And I often don't really care if it clashes with the energy of everyone else.
Right, because the feeling function, which is in the shadow, is all about the harmony between individuals, relationships, environments, and it's driven by like, I'm sensing kind of how you're feeling, and that's how I'm feeling, and for you just isn't center stage. So part of your shadow work is tapping more into that feeling function and being able to sort of challenge the external thinker part of your brain that wants to, move forward with the plan despite it maybe not fitting in with everyone's desires or whatnot.
So that's the kind of the work that I could do is I need to think about what is the side of me that's not being expressed very well. I don't feel very externally oriented. And maybe when I enter social situations, I should try to go with the flow more. I should try not to have a plan so much. I should try not to engineer so much. I should allow myself to be influenced by what's going on around me. I should allow free exchange of energy with other people. I should find a way to just enjoy people, just being with them, no matter what's happening, just sort of feeling like I'm in communion with other people is something that I can actually be mindful of and try to develop and bring that into awareness.
So what we're talking about here is self-discernment and identification of what your tendencies are and how you act in certain situations, and then really kind of mapping out for you some goals of how you can challenge that. Is it going up on stage? Is it maybe talking to your friends when you really don't want to? Maybe it's listening to a part of yourself that you often don't. Maybe it's getting more embodied. There's all these different ways in which we express, connect, open ourselves up both to the world or internally, and all of that is a chance for you to tap into the wholeness of your personality. So for me, the kind of steps of this shadow work, number one is figuring out where you really stand on these major pillars of extroversion, introversion, but the subtle aspects of it. How are you in a social situation? How are you in close relationships? How are you at work? These are all like big places where we tend to kind of flow in between extroversion and introversion. Of course, also like self-dialogue as well. Do you have that rich inner dialogue? Do you seem kind of resistant and want to focus on other people? Take some time and really think about which of these areas that you want to focus on. And then you can start to map out, I tend to be extroverted here. And that does work well, but sometimes I use it as a crutch.
Right. Do you feel comfortable being alone?
Yep.
No? you need to write about this. You need to think
Yeah.
about this. You need to find ways of like, how can I cultivate a rich inner world that is self-sustained? Are you someone who never organizes events? Are you always waiting for someone else to organize an event? Are you
Yeah.
always waiting for someone else to have a barbecue? Maybe you should do it. Maybe throw it out there. Hey guys, I'm organizing this outing to the park.
Yeah.
I'm organizing it. Like you never do that. Well, it's like that reinforces these shadow parts of us, this
Yes.
expectation that this is who we are and we
Yes.
shouldn't change.
Yes.
We want to try to develop these parts of us that are not in the light.
Yeah.
And as we integrate these parts into us, we become more complete. We become
Yes.
more whole. That doesn't mean that you're going to flip from introvert to extrovert, like one extreme to the other. That's not the point. It's like ideally, and also it's not to say that if you're an introvert that that's bad, that everyone needs to be on the border.
Right.
It just means you're trying to find out who you really are. You're trying to find this better balance, and all of us can always find a better balance if we just simply take the time to think about it, bring it into awareness, and develop a practice. All right, we have another dream from our audience. This is from a 17-year-old female, and here's the dream. I was pregnant, and my mom told me that the baby bump wasn't big enough for the kid to be alive. My best friend took me out to dinner to clear my mind. A couple showed up, but not as each other's dates. When I got there, we didn't tell anyone about the baby. At the diner, I got claustrophobic and left to go on a log ride. At the log ride, I got stuck between the walls of the ride, and an old friend helped me out. She made a PowerPoint presentation when I confided in her about the baby. I go back to the diner and see that 2 of my guy friends are there, and they are both flirting with me.
Exciting dream.
Very exciting.
I guess for me, the first thing that of course jumps out is pregnancy, and you know, and I'm looking at this symbolically because this holding of libido, of psychic energy around that's built around pregnancy is so powerful, especially for female. But it's really about creation, and it's about life, and it's about a new stage that's sort of waiting to blossom and kind of come into existence. So, you know, we noted here that the dreamer is quite young, 17 years old. So that's on that cusp of adulthood.
Right.
And certainly I think any 17-year-old girl would have a dream like that, be like, oh my God, I dreamt I was pregnant. That's really freaky. But think about it symbolically, thinking about what is happening within you, what's trying to come alive. And especially this dynamic around the mother saying, like, the baby bump's not big enough for it to be a real baby or for it to be alive. And so I'm very curious about what the dynamic between the dreamer and her parental figures are, or even those internal parental figures. Because the mother could certainly be like a voice inside of herself. So maybe
Certainly.
she's not feeling ready to allow this next stage to open up within her.
Right. So, as you said, birth is one of the most powerful human acts there is, especially for a woman. It is sort of like the spiritual act is having a child, becoming a mother. There's the sort of cyclical, I'm a mom, and now my mom is talking to me about my child, who will also become a mother. And so there's like this multi-generational thing, this cycle of life. And the older woman, the older mother saying that there's something wrong with the pregnancy, down to the younger mother has that sort of feeling of someone who's wiser and older than me is telling me that I'm not ready, or something has not happened correctly. And there's an energy within me that is coming forward, and I'm going to give birth to this energy, whatever that is. Doesn't have to be a child. It could be becoming a woman, it could be creative power, it could be something, anything. And pregnancy really has that deep archetypal resonance for us of creation. As you said, the deepest kind of creation there is. There is this kind of dynamic in this dream between what appears to be like the dream ego experiencing things, and then these older feminine figures. There's the mother, of course. So we have this internal figure that has that sense of maturity, of wisdom, of older age. She also mentions that
she runs into a friend, and that friend makes this PowerPoint presentation for her that when she confided in her about the baby, and in her submission she notes that this friend is someone who was much older than her. I think when she was a freshman, she was a senior. So of course, like, put yourself in that context of being like a young, bushy-eyed, like new freshman. You're just like, wow, seniors, they hold that wisdom. Like you project that archetype onto them. And so we have two figures in the dream who are trying to guide her and give her some insight about the creation archetype, the pregnancy here. So I would encourage the dreamer to really sit with and think about what was trying to be communicated from these older wise figures, because those are older wise archetypes within yourself that really kind of might hold some guidance for you in this situation.
Right, the imagery here is very interesting, that she is pregnant, she's going to have a baby, and then she enters this symbolic birthing of getting on the log ride, where she is entering a vessel,
right,
like a mother almost, and she's passing through a tunnel that is full of water and going to be spat out of the log ride in some way, and she's getting stuck between the walls of the ride,
right.
And so it's like she's being birthed, and it's not going well. Just like the baby inside her, it wasn't going well. So and again, so there's these sort of nested cyclical images of mothering and birth that are failing in some sense, or at least there's a tension there that she's having to grapple with.
Yes, there's the tension of what's stopping her internally, and yet at the same time, as a reaction to that, something that's coming forward to provide something. And that's often quite an interesting dynamic that I think we experience psychologically, is like we feel totally stuck. We don't know what to do. And then something releases. Then we have a thought. Then something clicks into place. And so this might be that kind of dynamic playing out in dream form, symbolically, imagistically. We're seeing the dreamer run into these roadblocks, and yet something's kind of coming to her aid. Right. So what's going on with these older figures who are trying to shine a light maybe on some aspect that's causing the blockage of the birth?
More tension here with making the baby. There's the couple that shows up. She mentions outside the dream that this couple is a couple that she's thought about before with her friend, talked about with her friends in real life. And so there's a couple showing up. The couple represents romance, coming together, making a baby perhaps. And there's the couple, for some reason, they're not together in the dream. So there's tension there. And then at the end of the dream, she shows back up at the diner, and there's boys there, and the boys are flirting with her. So again, there's this sort of romantic interactions happening. So all this tension that's cropping up, where she's entering all these different expressions, these different sort of facets of the life creation cycle, whether it's romance, sex, getting pregnant, being there with your mom, being birthed yourself. So it's very cosmic in that way of like going through all these different layers of reality as far as creation, as human birth goes. Yeah.
And to sort of further unpack this dynamic with like the lover's archetype, these two individuals who come and seem sort of split.
Right.
Usually they're people who in real life, I suppose, she's mentioned that they're very close, and a couple that she considers to be like, maybe like that's something that I would want, right? People who seem very close and very connected, but they're showing up in the dream sort of split. She also has the two individuals, the two males at the end, who are bringing this kind of attractive romantic energy towards her. So there might be a dynamic within her where that feminine principle and the masculine principle are sort of like out of balance, and so maybe there's like a desire to create and be in touch and grow and be in flow, and maybe more of that feminine principle she's more in touch with, but maybe there's something on the masculine end, which can be sometimes imaged by some sort of male figure coming into a dream, sort of showing you a romantic interest. It's like that's like an energy that wants to connect to you. So what are the personalities of these men that you're interacting with in real life? What do they hold? Maybe are they competent? Are they forward? Are they strong? Do they have a strong voice? Like, do they stand up for themselves? You know, do they seem like they have focus and vision? I don't know, whatever it is. There could just be something that's a little bit more on that other end of the spectrum that can help bring balance to the situation.
Do you have a question for us? Do you have a dream you'd like us to analyze? Is there a topic you'd like us to cover?
We want to hear from you. Contact us through the submission form, which can be found at our Instagram page at Golden Shadow Podcast. Or if you're listening on YouTube, you can find the link in the description down below.
Thanks for listening.
See you later.
If you find this podcast useful, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/Golden Shadow Podcast. Thank you.